Good evening, everyone. And you can see this evening we have Keshava with us again. After last week, for those of you who watch in sequence, I was despairing of ever having his presence again. But here he is. So we will chant for a while and then I'll talk for an hour. So I'm not quite sure what the total time span will be. Somewhere between 60 and 90 minutes, and I hope you enjoy it. So let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your presence within our hearts, guiding mind, feeling, and spirit, so that as we move through this world, we will move steadily, courageously, and joyously, ever closer to Thee. Om. Peace. Amen.
Tasmai Shri Gurave
friends, we are in the middle of our Gita commentary. So we are on chapter 7 of the Gita, verse 9. And this is a continuation of where Krishna is declaring to Arjuna his divine nature. And I commented at great length on chapter 7, verse 8, but I'm just going to read 8 and 9 together because they go together. O son of Kunti, the quality of dispassion, I am the fluidity of waters. I am the light of the moon and the sun. I am Pranaba, Om, in the teachings of the Vedas. I am the silent roar of cosmic sound in the ether, the subtle vibrations of space. I am the manhood in man. And the next verse, I am the wholesome fragrance of earth. I am the radiance of fire. I am the life of every creature. In holy ascetics, I am their austerity. Swami points out here that the reference that Krishna makes in both of these verses, he's beginning to mention the elements, fire, earth, water, ether, and it's an indirect reference to the chakras themselves. You know, he's talking about the inner power that's in us. The first chakra is considered the earth element, the second water, the third fire, the fourth air, the fifth ether, and then it becomes super ether for the sixth chakra, which is a word in English that's just made up to sort of give us the idea of what we're talking about. But what he's wanting to show us is also how the energy moves up and how the earth energy, let me just say this as it is, when we're talking about teaching the chakras, when we're talking about the chakras, which is as it happens simultaneously to this one at a different time of day, I've been giving a series of classes about the chakras, which I've done many different times over decades. And when we're talking about how we interiorize, we intensify, and we elevate the inner energy, what we're talking about is drawing our energy to a focus within the chakras, and then by developing power at the spiritual eye, we can pull that energy through the chakras. People think of this as Kundalini rising. That's the phrase that you hear, where there's this sudden release of enormous energy. Well, part of how that works is the way these elements work together. Specifically in this verse, we're talking about earth and fire. The nature of the earth element is that things appear fixed and immutable. So you imagine that once earth has assumed its form, that's the form it's going to keep. I had the very dramatic, exceedingly interesting experience many years ago now. It was the year 1976. And I was living at Ananda Village, which I did from 1971 to 1987, 16 years. It's a rural community in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. Nowadays, the concept of forest fire is constant. Then it was always a possibility, but not with the intensity that it has now. But periodically there would be a fire in that rural area. We couldn't have insurance. It was was beyond our reach, and it was very expensive in that area. And so there was this experience where it was June 10th or 11th, somewhere around in there, maybe the 17th, right in June. There had been 7 years of drought in California. Everything, trees, bushes, everything was just bone dry. And as we found out later, a county vehicle was on the country road. As the crow flies, maybe 4 or 5 miles from where Ananda was, a longer distance if you had to go on the outside of the road. But the primary point is he was downhill from the county vehicle was downhill from the ridge in our community at that point. And they had a faulty spark arrestor. The machine threw a spark out into the dry brush, and then just drove on, so he didn't see it, and a fire started. And we'd been through, fire threats. As I said, it happened every so often. We were very well organized with our little fire team. We had these little long sleeve cotton shirts that we wore. We all knew how to use tools. We had our little kits, so when fire started. So this fire started downhill, down several ridges, so it was some distance from what's known as Rajasi Ridge now. Just the Sunset Meadow Ridge up at Ananda Village, for those of you who know it. And the fire was burning uphill, which is how fires move the fastest. And then the way the winds work there on a regular basis, the wind got behind the fire. So the wind is blowing uphill, the fire is moving uphill. And we all, many of us went up onto the ridge to watch, to see what was going to happen. And we were all dressed up in our boots and our fire costume, all the stuff we had to play the part, holding our little tools. And we watched that fire coming up the hill. And I was with Jyotish as it happened, and I remember just sort of, we were younger and less experienced then. And the idea that anything really bad could ever happen to us was just not in our thinking. But we're watching this fire with the wind behind it, coming up the hill, burning through nothing but dry grass, which is just, it was heaven for the fire. I said to Jyotish, do you think it's actually going to burn Ananda down? He said, it certainly looks that way. And we got out there, and as the fire got closer, just to tell the whole story, there was, I don't know how many dozens of us, but there was a solid crowd up there, and there was a road that ran along the ridge, a dirt road at that time. And we started scraping all the brush farther away from the road, hoping to create a break in the fuel that would be enough so the fire wouldn't have anything to eat and would just stop right there. But what happened was the fire got to the edge of our fire break. It jumped our fire break, it jumped the road, and it just started burning on the other side. So there was a brief period of time where we were standing in this roadway and there was fire on both sides of us. And it crossed our minds that we needed to get out of there. So we did. We stepped back from it, but we still watched it, and we watched the fire go down across the ridge on the dry grass. And then all our houses were in that area of Ananda, many of our houses were in dense woods. Subsequently, we started doing more fire clearing, but they were in dense woods. We watched the fire hit the bottom of that forest, and just as we watched it, as fast as it can move, the fire went right up to the top of the tree, just burned right up the trunk, and then it started what they call tree topping. It started moving across the forest like that. And that was the point at which we all jumped in our vehicles or just ran down the hill, and just to get out of the way. Fortunately, there were fire trucks coming and bomber planes, but there were many fires in California at that time, and one of the reasons we had so much destruction was that equipment was spread too thin. Now, all of this is about the word fire, because fire, it takes something that you think is going to be there permanently, and it just destroys it. It just completely takes it away. Jyotish and Devi have one son, and that boy had been born 10 days before this fire. It was their first, and as it turned out, their only child. Devi and a woman friend of hers had taken the little boy to town for a well baby clinic. And so Jyotish and Devi and the baby were off the property when the fire struck. And when they came back, the police tried to stop them on the paved road. And they said, our family, our friends, our children, our homes, our whole lives are there. We are going through. And the policeman moved and let them go. By the time David got there, everything was gone, their whole house. So later she's talking to her mother a few days later. And her mother says, well, of course you got the baby things out, didn't you? No, Mother, we didn't. Well, of course you got your wedding presents or your best clothes or your winter things or your furniture. Every question. Devi said, no, Mother. She said, Mother, walk over to the fireplace in the living room, pick up a handful of ash. She said, that's what I have. That's what we have. Maybe they had an inch more. There was another marvelous story, which is also part of this verse, so let me tell you. I believe this is true. I never have actually heard this from Jyotish directly, but if it isn't true, it's apocryphal. As it happened, they had a lovely altar in their house, and that morning before she left for town, Devi had decided she wanted to just spruce up the whole altar. So she took all of the relics and the sacred objects and the pictures, everything off, and she'd put it into a box, one box. And so the altar was bare and everything was in the box. And when we saw the houses going like that, the housing area going up like that, people had the idea to rush and save what they could. So Jyotish rushes over in his car or his truck or whatever it was, runs to his house, but as he was rushing in, apparently, somebody said to him, "Take everything of value." Jyotish is an exceedingly philosophical person. So he walks into his house and he thinks, but I really admire this. He thinks, what is there of value? And what is there that, this fire has come to take this little place I call my home? And it was more like the yogi within you says, I'm not going to grab for trinkets in the face of this kind of a force. So he picked up that box and he walked out. Somebody came in after him. One of the things that made that whole experience so difficult is that it was the middle of the day and most people were not at home, which thank you God, because we had nobody got hurt. Nobody even came close to getting hurt. A firefighter, his plane crashed and he died. And by the grace of God, he did not die I don't think he died on our land, but he fell right next door. But none of the residents, no residents, neighbors, none of us were hurt. But somebody else ran in after Jyotish without his philosophical inclinations and did grab some of the baby clothes and some of the other things and rushed out. But you had to go into someone else's house. Subsequently, we organized completely differently. And, there's a list, this is what you should take. But at the end of it, one really had, at the end of the day, there was a time we were all down at the lowest point and everything was covered with smoke. We had no idea. We had no idea how much was going to be left at the end of the day. It turned out that the houses, 21 houses were burned, and all of them belonged to families, to householders. The monastery didn't burn, the meditation retreat didn't burn, the public buildings didn't burn. It was a particular karma for a particular group. But what happened, and whenever I think about the fire chakra, whenever I think about the earth and the fire chakra, and they're closely linked in this sense, which is fire, there is nothing that can stand against that fire, nothing. When we do the Festival of Light every Sunday, one of the parts of that ritual is the light bearer. There's a tall candle, and you light it from the altar, and you bring it to the front of the congregation, and you hold it, and you say, gaze upon this light as a symbol of God's love. And I've done this ritual for the last more than 30 years. And every time, though, I stand there, I'm standing there, and as it happens here in Palo Alto and now in many other places, it's a very large church. It would hold about 300 people. It's extremely high ceiling. It's very substantial. It was a Catholic church. It was built by the Franciscans. It's Franciscan style. It was built in the 40s. It's a very, very strong building. Gaze upon this light as a symbol of God's love. I'm holding a candle, single flame. And often, because there's a little bit of real estate from the altar to the front, it like the candle, the flame will flicker a little bit before it takes hold and I get to the front. These are things, I've been doing this over and over for decades. And I always look at that and I realize it could completely transmute this building into ash. That much. Flame it's like so small in comparison to what we're looking at. But the power of it, and we call it God's love, it's not the destructive power of Shiva, although Shiva is our friend too, because Shiva burns away all our delusions. we want to keep our delusion, so we consider him not a friend, but he's really our friend. And then I always think of what the community looked like. I had lived there at that point, 1976. I had lived there for 5 years. Almost every day, I would walk this from where I lived. I lived in the monastery, so we weren't burned. But I would walk over to the publications building, and I would walk through, as it happened, the burned areas. I did that every day for years. I got lost that next morning. I ended up in another part of the community, I mean, not miles away, but a thing I knew so well, in the light, in the dark, I got lost because the fire had transmuted that which seemed untransmutable completely into something else. So when we start talking, this is what the Gita is talking about here, when we start talking about the chakras, and we talk about being grounded in the earth chakra, which is the right energy. There's a lot to be said about the chakras. I don't want to go too far afield in this. But what we're really trying to do with the earth chakra is, let's think about it this way. Every chakra represents a vibration of consciousness, and there is an outwardly directed vibration of that consciousness, and there was an inwardly directed vibration of that consciousness. The vibration is essential, and this is subtleties about the chakras. All the chakras are good, but what causes them to be problematic from a spiritual point of view is if that vibration of consciousness tries to fulfill itself by reaching outside of oneself. So the vibratory quality of the earth chakra is security. That's what it means to be grounded. So the question becomes, what do I look to for my security? And of course people look to money, and they look to power, and they look to position, they look to the respect of other people, they look to all kinds of things. Or do I get my security from my relationship with God? And if I get my security from my relationship with God, then what can ever touch me? You see, that's what happened to Jyotish in the most beautiful way. You know, people are telling him to grab for a handful of material objects. And it's just, I live for God alone. I don't need to. He wasn't being entirely practical in his idealism, if the story is even true. But nonetheless, it's exactly what we should be doing. So when we're trying to pull that reaching outward, inward, see, this is where you interiorize, you intensify, and you elevate. And there's just a natural inclination to reach out to the world. I've shared with you many times about the time I was present at the birth of the daughter of a friend of mine, and it happened to be in the hospital, although it was a natural birth. And the little girl was in a very mild distress in her breathing, but sufficient in the hospital for them to carry the baby away from the mother and just take care of her, which she was well within a matter of half a minute. But her father went with her, and I followed the baby and the father. The baby is 2 minutes old, and she sees her father above her. She reaches out her hand and grabs his hand. Now, of course, that was a perfect thing for a little daughter to do to her father. She's meeting him for the first time in this incarnation, you know, all of that. But nonetheless, when I was watching, I thought, look, just right away, we're just reaching out for something outside of ourselves. There's a very powerful inclination to go that way. So in order to interiorize that, intensify and elevate it so that we can experience the security and the fulfillment we're really looking for through our connection to the divine, a great deal of willpower has to be used. And the willpower chakra is the third chakra, which is the fire chakra. So our energy has become trapped in the earth, but then in cooperation with the fire, and this is where it says, I am the wholesome fragrance of earth. I am not, I mean, what an odd thing, and I'm sure there's more esoteric to it than I can say, but the wholesome, meaning the uplifting, the positive, the sweet-smelling part of this, from the point of view of sweet because divinely inspired, not just because of the actual perfume. But the earth element combined with the fire element, then I am the radiance of fire. Not just the power, but the beauty and the light. Because even more powerfully than the fire coming in and burning down what you're attached to, the radiance of the fire attracts us, doesn't it? Isn't that how, we all fire gazing, and you anywhere you are, even in the Festival of Light, gaze upon this light. And it's really, I'm closer to it than many people, but even when I'm in the congregation, even when I'm at a great distance, it's very interesting to me. I look through the rows of people and I see whoever is officiating that day holding this candle. Flame is still tiny, but I can see it because it's living. It's a living radiance. It's the symbol of God's love and God's power. Swamiji made the fascinating statement, which I've contemplated a great deal, that this world is a poor imitation of the astral world. The astral world is the energy blueprint for this world, and they tell us that the astral world looks a lot like this world, only like what this world should look like the ideal version of this life, this world with, beautiful scenery and beautiful flowers and, just everything that we find beautiful and attractive here. We also see it in its radiant light form in the astral world. And we sort of realize what was trying to be accomplished here, which wasn't quite accomplished by it, but that radiant form. And so then it's not a question of the fire having to come in and make us renunciates by destroying everything we were attached to. You don't become a renunciate merely because you have lost it. I think it was, I don't know whether it was Sri Ramakrishna or some other master, but someone comes and the man comes and said, my wife has left me, my business has gone bankrupt, my children have disowned me, I want to become a monk, I want to renounce the world. And whoever it was, the Guru said, no, my friend, you're not renouncing the world has renounced you, which is not the same as you consciously letting it go. It can be ripped away from you by fire or other forces, and you may embrace what God has sent you, step into. This is where Jesus said, if once someone strikes you on one cheek, then turn to him the other. And that's when they came to carry Jesus away and ultimately crucify him, and he knew full well why they were there. The armed cohort came to where he was with his disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Judas was there to kiss Jesus on the cheek and thereby identify for the soldiers which one was Jesus. This was the deal Judas has made. You have to realize, no television, no Instagram, no internet, They knew of him, but how did they know what he looked like? No photographs, So he could have been any one of several men, so Judas walked up and identified him. But Jesus said, who are you seeking? And then they said, the one who calls himself Jesus. And then Jesus stepped forward. This is how the Bible says it. Jesus stepped forward and said, I am he. Rather than shrinking back and seeing if he could hide behind the others, he stepped into it. And they say that the power of him stepping forward, even though he was at a distance from the armed soldiers, knocked them to the ground. It's just such a magnificent story. So what we want is the radiance of the fire, not the imposed upon us destruction of the fire. But we want to take the sweet fragrance of the earth, the wholesome fragrance of the earth, which is the positive side of the earth chakra. We want to use our will deliberately to rise up into the radiance of the fire, and then I become the life of every creature, which is the air element, the life element in the heart. So this is the divine rising in us. This is our destiny. That's really what this is. I've often joked that sometimes karma is we are going to move toward God, one way or another, because that's our destiny. So we can either move forward eagerly, and I will say because of the radiance of the light, oh, isn't that beautiful? Let's go toward that light. Or we can try to stay where we are, and then we'll catch fire from behind. The fire will just come up behind us. Then we'll run forward because we're being compelled. But how much more powerful, as Jesus did, I am He, step forward into the light. So this is what this verse is trying to tell us. So now, chapter 7, verse 10, and this is more about Krishna as the Divine Lord telling Arjuna, know me, O son of Pritha, Arjuna, to be the seed of all creatures. I am intelligence in the discerning, and in those who are glorious, I am their glory. So again, Krishna is telling us, I'll just say this part, which is anything that is beautiful and powerful and admirable in us is the presence of God within us. And in everything, if you go to the heart of it, what you find there is the divine. And this is the whole practice of meditation, which is profoundly and deeply urged upon us, is that we interiorize, we intensify, and we elevate our energy. And we discover what the core of our being actually is. Am I this body, this ethnicity, these relationships, this whatever it might be? Now, later on, it also says that God is also He's the dark as well as the light. He's the force of everything. But He's also just telling us in the most beautiful way, anything powerful and beautiful that comes out of us, know that that's the divine running through you. And this is something that as you devote yourself to spiritual practice, you just begin to have this feeling. You just know that something has happened, but the I that one usually identifies with, the egoic self, the physical self, the limited self, that what flowed through you is independent of that. That you just were the window through which this could come. And this is the state of great masters. They become a clear window. Swami used to always, often would tell us a story of when he was a young monk at Mount Washington, living with Master, and he had it was either his bedroom or his office, I'm not sure where, but there was a large window. And then there was a rainstorm, and the window faced upon a garden. And during the rainstorm, mud was kicked up, and so the window became a little splattered with mud. And as often happens, a number of weeks went by in which Swami kept thinking, I have to clean the window. He never got around to cleaning the window. Then finally, he went outside with the window cleaner, and he made it just perfect. And then he went back inside, and he said, what a beautiful window. But of course, what he had done is he had disappeared the window. Because when all the obstruction was gone, it was he could just look right through it and see the garden. It was the garden that was beautiful. When he could actually see the window, because it was covered with mud, there was nothing beautiful about it at all. And so this is what Krishna is trying to get us to understand. To those who are glorious, I am their glory. And it's not like Krishna's trying to take all the credit. He's just trying to wake us up to what's really happening. Swamiji talks about this in other ways too, and Master says this in Autobiography of a Yogi. Thoughts are not individually created. They are merely streams of consciousness that we tune into, and they're just waiting there for us to receive them. We receive our thoughts and inspirations. We don't create them. They're not individual, they're universal. Thoughts are not individual, they're universal. And if you just pay attention, ideas come to us, thoughts come to us, creative ideas come to us, or melodies, or poetry, or inspiration to do something. And if we reflect carefully, and if we meditate deeply, where do those ideas come from? Where do they originate from? And then we begin to see how much we are just windows. And we either clog those windows with self-concern and self-identification and egoic desires, or we clear those windows so that the energy can flow through. My friend Haridas, he and his wife Roma now run Ananda Center in Chennai. No, not Chennai, Bangalore, India. They're Americans, but they live there. And Haridas was always very good at turning a phrase and magnificently humble. And whenever someone would compliment him on, like, because he's wonderful at chanting, oh, that was wonderful chanting you did, or what a wonderful Sunday service you gave, what a wonderful class. He had this way, what he would say is, oh, yes, something inspiring happened, and I got to be there. And it was both a clever turn of phrase, but he was being truthful. Something inspiring happened, and he got to be there. He never felt like I did something inspiring. He just didn't feel that way. Because what he had done, the active energy he'd put forth, was to clean the window so that the divine energy can flow through. How I always feel when I'm doing something like this or in front of people, this is how I've come to both understand it and to genuinely feel it. Much more, especially, well, I won't say especially because I've done so much online work that I've come to understand this too. Starting with when I would stand in front of groups, which I do now also again, now that our pandemic is waning. And Swami would often say this to people, far more than you realize, he would say to the audience, the quality of what he is able to say depends on the receptivity of the people to whom he's speaking. And so the way I have felt it is there's this powerful divine force that somehow feels like I use physical space, but it doesn't matter, that it's somehow behind me. And there is a group in front of me that I've been sent to share with, and they are a magnet. And they're a magnet. It's not that they're a magnet for me. They're a magnet for the force that is behind me, which is just random geography. But because I'm standing between those two elements, the access point is through me. And the access point is, if it's words, I'm not a singer. If you're a musician, the access point would be music or chanting, as Keshav was sharing it. But the access, I just pass it on. It's offered to me and I pass it on. And if nobody wants it, there's nothing to say. What I was adding to this is Swamiji had always talked about responding intuitively to the inner reality of his audience. And that's why every single talk is different, because every single group is different. Even if you're talking to the same people, time has passed, experiences have happened, and everything is different. And there is a certain qualifying energy based on one's own, the intermediary, on one's own attunement and inclination in the moment. I'll tell you a funny story about this. It may have been practically the first, not the first, but close to the first lecture tour I ever went on. It would have been in the early 80s. And my friend Shivani, who is my peer, and she and I traveled together, and it was like about a 6-week trip, and we went up the West Coast, up to Vancouver, Canada, and down to I don't know if we went to Southern California, but the whole West Coast, all the way up to Canada. And Shivani has always had a very deep interest in Master's techniques of healing. It's a lifelong interest, in the fact she's writing a wonderful book about it right now. And it's never been my particular focus. I don't have the same passion for it that she does, and especially in those years, because she was so devoted to it, I just put my energy on other things. So we go on this trip together, and we have essentially set up a program where we alternate. She gives a program one night, I the next, sometimes together, but mostly we alternated. So we had, in all these different cities, we had her healing programs set up. We were just a few days into this trip. Really, I don't think we were at it very long. Her husband was a contractor. She helped him with his business. I don't know what happened exactly, but he got into trouble with the job. And he called her and he said, you know, I'm really in trouble, I need you. So she just walked away from that tour and she went down to be with him. So now I'm stuck and I have to fulfill her commitment with these healing programs. She leaves me all her notes and so on, and I'd been listening to her. I wasn't ignorant, but I just wasn't in it like she was. And I remember, I remember even where we were. We were in Longview, Washington, wherever the heck place that is, in this little sort of chapel place. And I'm standing up to give this class on Master's Divine Will Healing, or whatever we called it at the time. And I was standing there, and my intuition was still working, and it was working really well. I started talking, and I started talking about what I knew about this subject. And I could feel, I can actually almost even see the man. I can see the man. One man in particular, but the whole room, they really wanted more information about that. And I could just feel them trying to pull it out of me. And I had to do all this. I was doing all this inwardly without being able to make a big story. I just had to say, I'm sorry. I know that's what you want to hear, but I've told you everything I know, so I have to go over here and talk about this instead. And I just shifted my focus to what I did understand. But if my window had been cleaner, which is if I was educated as Shivani had educated herself, then I could have followed that train. A master, Swami Kriyananda, might have just been able to pull it out of the infinite. But I was not sufficient. But there are other subjects, especially now, 45 years later, you know, where there's just there's so much that I have made my own, that I can just flow in many directions, and I don't even think about how or who or what's being called. I just find it comes and it begins to work itself out. Now, there was one more point that was very important. Oh yes, this is what I wanted to share. Not important, but just interesting. So having understood all of this about the audience, Swami would go, when he gave a public talk to an audience, he would always want us to arrange for him. There was a time when I was arranging a lot of his public tours. He would always like to have a room that he could come to like a half hour early and he could meditate. And he would meditate essentially in the hall, but not on the stage, while people were arriving. And he would meditate on them, and he would pray to Master to inspire him to give them what they needed. And he liked to do that in the place where the energy was gathering. So fast forward, we're in India in 2004, and Swamiji realizes that the way now, at the age of 78 almost, the way to reach the people in India is not so much traveling around physically, which he was not strong enough to do beyond a certain amount, but by television. So he arranges, I say we, I always use the royal we when I talk about Ananda, which is everything about it is sort of my world, but we had arranged that he was able to have a half-hour television show every day. And so he had to record, now I might have this a little confused, yeah, I think that's what it was. He had to record all these shows, dozens, hundreds in the end. And he was just recording to a camera. There was a little group of us in the room, but we were not the audience. The audience was 2 months from now in people's living room all over the country of India. And so I asked Swamiji, I said, there's nobody on the other side of the camera. This is a live broadcast, although most of you will watch this at another time frame than this one. I said to Swami, how do you do that? I said, there's nobody there. And he just said, I feel their consciousness. Meaning, time is no obstacle. I'm being used by the divine to satisfy a need that will arise. This is the amazing thing about the divine answer and the divine power. Sometimes you'll pray in the morning and a solution to the problem will come in the evening. But, for example, Shanti Rubenstone sometimes tells a story about trying to purchase some property that was very important to do, and not having quite enough money, but feeling she was supposed to do it, and sitting and meditating and praying about it. And then she went to her mailbox, and there was a check for like $5,000 or something, whatever it was she needed at that point. And of course, that check was mailed 4 days before the prayer was offered. But God knew that the prayer was going to be offered, so he wanted to make sure that the check was in the mail, because time is not an issue like this. So I myself, the only thing I can say is I've come to understand what Swami said. At the time I was exceedingly intrigued, but what it is, it's the feeling of being an instrument. It's the feeling of having cleaned the window, not like Swami has cleaned the window, but sufficient, that there's a hole that it could get through. I don't want to either be arrogant or dishonest. I can feel it. I know it's happening, and there's a certainty to it. And I had an amazing experience of that personally. Really, this was one of my favorite things. There is a series of programs that Swami did. It was one of the last things he did in his life. And Dharmadas and Nirmala, who have been lifelong friends of Swamiji's and were the leaders of our India work and were with Swami there for many years, very close association. Swami wanted to film this informal program that he called Ask Me About Truth. And it's very informal. Swami sits in a chair here, and Dharmadas and Nirmala sit here, and they have conversation. It is, if you haven't seen it on the internet, it is one of my favorite programs, because it's just the relaxation, the laughter, the friendship among the three of them, everything about it I love. 108 programs, I think. I've watched all of them more than once. And sometimes when I'm energizing in the morning, I'll just turn on one of those programs just randomly and listen to it. So there was a day, I don't remember, a couple of years ago or a year ago or 2 months ago, I lose track of time. I was not feeling very well. I don't even remember what was troubling me, not physically, but spiritually. I just felt discouraged. I felt down. I must have made a whole series of mistakes, or things weren't going well. I don't know what it was, but I felt kind of not happy. So I'm energizing like this, and Swami's talking, and I don't even know what episode this is, but I'm listening to Swami, and as a complete non sequitur, he says something that you would think I would have remembered, because I'd seen these programs before, but I don't think it was in there before, or it wasn't, I just never heard it. Apropos of nothing, Swami says, that's why I like to work with Asha, because she has such a good sense of humor. And then he goes back to whatever else he was talking about. Then it was perfect, it wasn't, that's why I like to work with Asha, because she's a God-realized saint or anything like that. It was because she has a good sense of humor, which she does. And Swami and I always laughed a lot, because we were both witty in the same way and like the same kind of wit. But it was like, oh my God, here I am, and he's been, out of this world for 6 or 7 or 8 years. He's not even on the planet anymore. But he put that phrase in there so that 7 years later, or whatever it was, when my mood was sinking, God could just reach out and use him to lift me out again. Otherwise, why would he say such a thing? It's just like, if we only knew how much God loves us, we would die for joy. And coming back to these verses, which I'm moving through very slowly, in the middle of everything that we do, it's the vibrating power of the divine. We feel so little, we feel so vulnerable, we feel so hopeless sometimes, but the glory of God lives within us. I am, Krishna says. I am the thread on the beads of reality, and I run right through it. Interiorize, intensify, and elevate the energy. That's what sadhana is. It's not just meditation. It's everything that we do, every attitude that we have. And, take the power of the earth and follow the radiance of the fire, to the life force. This is what God wants us to do. So, there, chapter 7, verse 11. And Krishna goes on, among the powerful, O best of the Bharatas, Arjuna. There's so much that can be said about the Gita that I don't know. Every one of these names of Arjuna is a whole long story by itself. And somebody else can tell that story because I don't know it. But there it is, so you can enjoy it. Among the powerful, O best of the Bharatas. In the verse before, he was, O son of Prita. And over here, he was, O son of Kunti. So it just keeps going. Kunti and Prita are actually, I believe, the same person, just different names for the same mother. So there you go again. Among the powerful, O best of the Bharatas, Arjuna, I am power without personal ambition and attachment. I am that sexual desire, kama, in men which is in keeping with dharma, righteousness. Now this is such an interesting verse, because this is how Swami describes it. He says, let's see how he says it. He says, because desire is such a strong factor in the lives of human beings, it should be pointed out incidentally that good, that is to say dharmic desires, bring good results. And then he goes on to say, but only temporarily. Desirelessness alone leads to liberation. But what this verse is about is directional development. And there's so many... It's funny when I hear myself say, if you all know it, why would I be telling you again? These sort of speech habits just creep in there. But we do know, so maybe it's not so bad. As you know in your deeper self, as I know in my higher self, Swamiji had so many wonderful ways of clarifying and articulating Master's teachings, or merely highlighting things that Master himself said. And one of the things that has always been fundamental to Ananda, which is just so powerful, is that spiritual development is not absolute. It's not like I'm limited today and tomorrow I'm free. And it's not like we can just get to it from nothing to something. And the word that Swami uses so beautifully and over again is directional. And it's not a question of where you are, because we can't help where we are in this sense, which is we've had many incarnations, we've accumulated many vrittis, we've accumulated many desires, we have many longings, we have many regrets. All of these experiences together are what awaken us to the need for sadhana, to the need for spiritual life, to the need for God. And you can tell by just looking around. There's really lots of really nice people in the world who it just hasn't even crossed their mind that what they should do is strive for self-realization. It's just not in their radar at this particular point. And one of the characteristics of a path like ours, and a sangha, a spiritual group like Ananda, with the teaching like self-realization, is that we generally attract people who have some capacity to function in the world. There are wonderful spiritual teachings that will help people who don't know how to function yet. I was on a radio interview show, this again many years ago, and I was invited there to talk about the Ananda community. This must have been in the 70s, because it was about organic gardens and goats and things like that. It was more just about the community. It wasn't really about our teachings. And there was a man who was a host. I didn't know anybody. I was just somehow got booked into this or was invited. But somehow between the time I was invited to come in and talk about the goats and the organic gardening and whatever else we were doing, the host found out they were actually into yoga and meditation and had an Indian guru. And as it happened, he was a devotee of Jesus of the most sectarian type, the type that just feels that Jesus is the only savior, everybody else is damned to hell. And he also felt, as part of his definition of being a devotee of Jesus, that he was obligated to witness for Jesus Christ as our only Savior, especially in the presence of the infidel. And suddenly I had become the infidel. So I walked in to talk about goats and dairies and organic gardens and maybe a little bit about vegetarianism. But all of a sudden I was the infidel, and the man felt it was part of his divine duty, and I respect divine duty, to try to persuade me that Jesus was my only Savior and that I would go to hell if I didn't take it on. We're on live radio here. And before all this happened, somehow I learned about him. He had had a terrible drug problem. He'd been homeless. His life was absolutely just in the garbage can. And then Jesus saved him, which all I can say is, hallelujah, praise the Lord. Jesus saved him. But his grip on what he was doing, in order to stay off the streets and stay off of drugs and keep himself away from whatever the hellish inner world had been that drove him to that life. So I didn't want to do anything to in any way lessen his grip. What he was doing was exactly what he should be doing. I don't know whether telling me I was going to hell was exactly what he should be doing, but I just didn't want to touch his belief. I didn't want to do anything about it. So I was sort of on the horns of a dilemma, because I was trying to do this radio program. And finally, after some minutes of this, just trying to sort it out, I finally said, it's just, I don't know how we're going to reconcile this, because your spiritual understanding does not have room for mine. Mine has lots of room for yours, but we're sort of stuck. So I said, I'm not going to talk to you about this anymore. So I just went silent. And he tried to get me to answer, and I wouldn't say a thing. I said, I'll talk to you about our community, but I won't talk about this. And so after a couple of minutes, he had to give up because he had to do the program. And we went ahead and did it. Now, he was moving forward. He was moving forward. The direction of his development was positive. And hallelujah, praise the Lord. But if I went there from what I'm experiencing, I would be moving backwards. So you can't, it's not like everybody starts here and everybody ends here, and it's all this sort of so clear cut. You're ahead of me, I'm ahead of him. It's like, it just depends on what is forward for one person. There's this wonderful story about the way it's told about Ramakrishna, of two different disciples, and both of them were in a position where they heard Ramakrishna being denigrated, and one of them became exceedingly angry and was shouting and threatening them, and the other just remained silent. And Ramakrishna criticized both of them. The angry man, he said, what do you care what fools think? Why are you wasting your time and energy? Because he was perfectly good at defending Ramakrishna. He needed to just calm down and realize it didn't matter. The other man, Ramakrishna, was weeping because he said, they said so many unkind things about me and nobody spoke up to defend me. Because directional for that man was to show a little fire, have a little outrage. So it just depends on whether what we're doing is expansive or contractive. Meaning, does it make us bigger in our spirit, or does it make it smaller in our spirit? And also it's a question, let me just a second, let me catch this correctly. It's also a question of, we can't just skip stages. And the specific comment here about sexual desire, which is in keeping with Dharma, is that, this is what the sexual desire brings people into relationship, into marriage. Marriage brings people to children, and raising children for vast numbers of people. It's not that we need to populate the planet, or that raising children per se is some great service, but for many, many people, they learn to open their hearts. They learn selfless love. They learn disciplined self-sacrifice. They expand their sense of identity beyond themselves. And so sexual desire leads to marriage, leads to children, but it's all directional because it's righteous in keeping with Dharma, and it's expansive. A friend of mine, I was very, very, very touched by the way he described this. He said he was living in San Francisco, had a wonderful job, had lots of money, had a good personal relationship, intimate relationship, everything. He said, and everything was going exactly as, it should go. And he realized that he was just living for himself, living happily and cheerfully, and not grossly, but just for himself. And he realized he had to do something to just expand his reality, so he adopted a child, raised his son beautifully. It was just like, it was directional, but someone who is just, how would you say it, just completely immersed in God and no longer, and whose heart is already wide open but impersonal, to bring it all the way down to just focus on one individual, even though it was directionally expansive for one, would be contractive for the other. Which is why, not always, but much of the time, you see the great saints and teachers often don't marry and rarely have children. Not that it's a bad dharma, it's just not theirs. So God condemns nothing. Everything has a right place, and just depending on who we are and how it affects us. It's not the thing in itself, it's how it affects our energy, which determines whether it's righteous or not. Sex is a good one to mention by name because there's such a misunderstanding. But of course, bear in mind, we're not talking licentious self-indulgence. We're talking in keeping with Dharma. And then Krishna says, I am sexual desire. It's just very interesting. This is why the Gita has remained vibrant and relevant for hundreds and hundreds, generations after generations, because the truth it describes is so deep, so powerful, so multi-leveled, so practical, and so extremely beautiful. So, my friends, God bless you.